All right, we're going to do a topical podcast this week. We're going to discuss Dave Castro, his legacy at the CrossFit Games, his firing right at the start of the current game season, throw some uninformed, partially informed opinions out there. You know, we're diving into the clickbait world of CrossFit journalism, and our lead clickbait correspondent, John Colborn. What's your take? What's your take on this situation?
Shocking news. Listen all the way through this podcast to see what we think of Dave Castro. No, I mean, obviously the timing is slightly off. We're 5 weeks away, 6 weeks away from the Open, something like that. And at this point, CrossFit has to come up with new Open workouts because obviously Dave had already written them, but they can't use those workouts. Like even if they wanted to, I think Dave would have no issue leaking them to certain people. You know, not to say that's wrong of him in that sense. You know, to get fired at this point, I think him leaking workouts wouldn't be like particularly outrageous, but they have to come up with new workouts. And there's an element of a time crunch there. You know, the workouts need to be tested. They need to be run by a few different people. They need to be balanced across the Open. Like I'm pretty sure there was going to be at least 4, maybe 5 scored workouts this year across the 3 weeks. So it's how do they make sure they have everything up to speed in time to then have all the video, the literature, the score sheets, all of this thing ready for the Open. So it'll be an interesting few weeks and see what happens there. And to see if they decide to actually completely like appoint a head programmer or if they have a collective. You know, they have Spencer Hendel, Maliolo, and James Hobart who are running the affiliate programming. You know, I could see potentially them taking the lead on the games programming or the game season programming. Just knowing that they need people with experience. You know, all of them have competed at the games on teams and individuals. They've all been around the scene for a long time. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens between now and the Open with regards to announcements and programming.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that if you're going to make an aggressive decision like that, like you mentioned, John, with some some element of a time crunch, you'd probably have some sort of backup plan already in place, right? Like you're probably not going to make that call without having some sort of contingency of like, okay, like if this completely blows up and Dave leaks the workouts, like here's what we're going to do, right? And like you mentioned, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
I don't think there's a plan like that.
Okay, nice.
From my understanding, the announcement from Rosa was a surprise to everyone in HQ.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Not to say that it wasn't unexpected. You know, I think it was a long time coming with regards to his position within HQ, but I think it was, no one knew that it was going to happen right when it did.
I see.
So I don't know that, I'm sure Eric didn't have a plan post Castro. You know, they obviously moved Justin Berg into that position as like, he was already the manager of the CrossFit Games. But, you know, I don't know if he's going to be the guy to take on programming, but I don't think they had a plan. I don't think there was a contingency for what to do if we fire him.
Yeah, I mean, that seems unlikely to me. I mean, given Rosa's history with, you know, tech companies that are worth $1 billion and one would assume to be run like actual companies, right? Like you always have some sort of succession plan. If you're going to take some sort of aggressive action like that, you know, you at least do some sort of like strategy ahead of time. Like, all right, what needs to happen? And certainly you're not going to be spreading the news everywhere of like, hey, we need to have a backup plan if and when we fire Dave, right? That's not going to be a good way to do things.
But also you have to remember his role there was really just I get that he did a lot outside of this, but his thing that needed filled was programming. Like all the logistics around the games and all the management of that wasn't done by him, right?
Right.
His sole role within that realm was programming the workouts and the athlete kind of tests and experience. So it wasn't like, oh, the Open's going to fall apart now. It's like, no, you have someone that can plug in the workouts across the 3 weeks and everything else is running as normal.
Yeah, interesting.
And he already wasn't going to do live announcements, right? They've taken that aspect out. When it comes to the games, it's like, he's not in charge of like booking the Alliance Energy Center or whatever. Everything's kind of in place.
Anyway, you get a sense that obviously some people are quite hung up on it because they feel like he takes on this bit of the sort of like mad scientist role within the programming. And as John was saying, he takes care of the programming. So therefore it's like he's a bit of a connection back to what, CrossFit has been, throughout the years, and sort of the, how can I say, a lot of people think that the sort of programming is fairly like artistic, and it's about trying to sort of find that right combination of things like intensity, novelty, and all those types of stuff, and trying to sort of bring it together. But you can definitely see that this is a strategic decision, and Dave isn't necessarily a good character to have when it's sort of. I think when it comes down to like, pushing forward the games and seeing how this can grow, especially internationally. I do know he's a bit of a character, and I do think that there is definitely space for individuals to sort of be characters within the setup. But I think that maybe now the programming might be more of a collaboration. It might be sort of taken on a little bit more of maybe a little bit more of a structured approach as well, just because I know that there has been feedback from athletes who, some of them actually sort of like the whole randomness and the sort of being thrown in the deep end and not knowing what to expect. But then other people are trying to make a professional living off of it, and they're viewing it very much like that. And what they want is to have a little bit more, say, stability, so that they can then try to approach their living and their training as such, sort of similar to, say, the international functional fitness movement. Now, I'm not 100% sure if they're sort of trying to move a little bit more into that direction, or they're just sort of going to continue going sort of like as they are. But it is definitely interesting to sort of see there's a lot of people who have been involved in CrossFit for a long time, and they feel that like someone like Dave Castro is sort of one of the you could say the sort of final parts of being attached to old school CrossFit, and the sort of nostalgia of the ranch and all of that stuff, which I completely get. But at the same time, the sport does need to progress, and Eric Rose's sort of plan is to make CrossFit like the number one thing for everything health related. I think that was one of the big visions that he sort of came up with when he came on board. And for CrossFit to do that, it definitely can't be sort of down to, the main spectacle of CrossFit and the thing that attracts people and the thing that pulls people in. You could say that that being sort of just down to like one individual, there's definitely some room for error there. It opens you up for sort of for things not necessarily going well. Whereas if you have a team behind it and you have something that may be a little bit more of a collaborative effort, something that's a little bit more systemized, which I think is going to be the sort of direction they're going to go into. I definitely think that's going to be an interesting one to sort of see how it plays out. I'm not too sure. John, did you say that it wasn't necessarily, there isn't necessarily like a plan in place, or it was just very, it took a lot of people within CrossFit by surprise?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I think there was surprise at, like, there was no warning, there was no like rumblings within the company. It was just kind of a, yeah, he's gone. And then, people that you perceive could be stepping into that role didn't know he was on his way out. But yeah, I mean, I think on what you were saying there, like, yeah, he's that kind of link to the origin of the games and things like that. But one thing that's telling is if you look, there were a lot of athletes speaking out, right? They're like, oh, this is, we love Dave. We wish he was still there. But there were not many current top athletes commenting. I think Tia directly didn't say anything, but Proven just said something like, thanks for all the hard work over the years or whatever. It was something in that realm. It wasn't like a siding with Dave or against him. It was just like a thank you for what you've done. And a few of the other kind of top athletes did the same thing. All the posts that were like, this is a terrible decision, you shouldn't have done this, were all from athletes who aren't really at their peak or currently in the sport. It's from athletes who have been at the games over the past 10 years, but maybe not in the last 3 years.
I mean, it's from athletes who Castro played favorites with and palled around with, which is probably part of the reason why he's not there.
Went on road trips with,
and I think the fact that like a lot of the top current athletes aren't speaking out about it is because they realize that not a huge amount is going to change.
I mean, do you think that's
still going to be a well-programmed?
Do you think not that much is going to change?
I think so. I think we're taking out a character. We're not, you look at the amount of competitions, like Wadapalooza going on this weekend. It's a big competition. It's well programmed. There's a lot of good events there this week. And there are plenty of people capable of programming the game season and giving the same kind of tests, the same kind of experience that we've had for the last, 10 years.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, just from a programming perspective, because I actually think a lot is probably going to change from how the games are run. Oh, which to Luke's point, I think is good, right? Because I think that one of the main reasons probably why this firing happened is because if you want to run the CrossFit Games like an actual sport rather than like the WWE, with Castro sort of playing Vince McMahon, then you have to like change the leadership and change the direction, right? Yeah. I mean, because, this sort of like, oh, fooled you, you thought it was going to be this, but now it's this, like, surprise, no barbells this year. Like, guess what? Like, here's this movement standard no one has ever seen before. Like, that's just not how the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NFL, the Premier League, right? Like it doesn't work that way. And like part of that is the spectacle. But if you're like, hey, we want to be a legitimate sport and not just this kind of like weird sideshow entertainment thing, it makes sense to change leadership. And, you can say, okay, like Dana White somehow managed to pull this off in the MMA world where he kind of gets to be this charismatic, bizarro person. But I do think that the overall infrastructure surrounding the sport is going to change like massively for the positive.
And I think you're right. I think there has to be some element of continuity through how people train for the sport and how the sport is done. But I do think I don't think the strange movements that kind of get thrown in occasionally are good. But I do think the variety in the way that the tests change is good. Because I think if you have the same kind of tests every time, and the same modalities every time, it's gonna get a little bit boring. When Rogue throws out some new toys for the games, it's like, okay, this is good. This is, it's not something that everyone's going to train with. We're seeing something a little bit about adaptability of the athletes and just their like athletic ability to do something they haven't done before.
Yeah.
And as long as it's not stupid things like a softball throw.
Yeah. I think though that if people can train for like, if they understand that if you go to the games, generally speaking, there's going to be one new piece of equipment that people have to like get their heads around and figure out. There could be one novel challenge or something like that. But it's, there has been experiments sort of thrown into the games that have not worked. and there's also been, just sort of like a novelty for novelty's sake, you could say, as well, or throwing in variation for variation's sake. But it's like if there was like for example,
what's your opinion on an O course?
The obstacle course. I think, I think that that is that's a good event. I think I'm not I'm trying to think back to, was it 2018? But like there's definitely certain things which I think need to be tested at the games that are not tested in the sort of in the parts running up to it. There's definitely an element of some new challenge that needs to be there. But I also think that it just needs to be sort of put in a way where people can actually prepare for it as well, and people know what to expect, and it's somewhat reasonable. It's not necessarily like a softball throw, which I know that stuff is 10 years ago. But I do think, say for example, some of the categories that came out with the International Functional Fitness Federation, where they would have like one workout designated to the sort of aerobic capacity, one workout designated to sort of body weight movements. And this is similar to what you would see at regionals, and similar to what I think is sort of the template that sanctionals have been given as well, where it's like you need to have one high power couplet within this time domain, one heavy workout, one very high skilled. Like, I think having that structure and having that to the games would be good. And obviously you need to figure out, the differences between, all of the qualification process and the templates you're going to use there, and then what you would use at the games. But it would just bring a bit of continuity to the sport, and it wouldn't necessarily just be, because the thing is CrossFit is still seen as a bit of a bit of a joke in the sports world. If you have a look at like strength sport communities and I look at a lot of strength and conditioning material out there, and they do recognize CrossFit and for what it's good for, but as a sport and as an activity and as a professional sport, they don't see it like that. They definitely see it as like something which is like the WWE, or it's not held as in high regard. So I think it will be interesting to sort of see what happens, but I do think some element of like systemizing the games programming is going to be good if that's what they're going to go for, which I feel like they will. Who knows, right? But something whereby it looks a little bit like the template or the workouts you would generally see at sanctionals and regionals, right? But obviously, you may have some things like multi-sport, having things like obstacle courses, because you've got the facility, you can be adaptive in it. And also think that like maybe hosting the games in other places as well, right? Giving the opportunity for more of like an international community, given, and I don't know if this is related to what we're talking about now, but I think that it will be very important for it to grow, because CrossFit in Brazil is just like, it's huge, it's massive, and then there's certain areas which are just it's still just blowing up, and it's still getting huge. And I think that whether it's like you have individuals who are taking on the program and taking on the organization, or you have like a team of people doing it, I definitely think that there might be ways in which they can sort of grow it to be a lot more than it currently is, and it to be sort of Eric Rose's sort of vision of being the number one thing for health and fitness and sport in the world.
Yeah, I think that the other big thing that is part of that vision is creating just like an infrastructure, like you were saying, Luke, that facilitates not just the fittest on earth, like winning the CrossFit Games every year, But also like what happens to the 20th place athlete, right? What happens to the coaching organizations that coach, 4 athletes who make it to the CrossFit Games? What happens to the up and coming companies who are trying to sponsor athletes? And I think a lot of the sort of, just goofiness of CrossFit and the lack of clarity and the sort of like thin skinned reaction to criticism was really negative for the ecosystem of the sport. Right. It's like, yeah, Matt and Tia, we're going to win no matter what. Like you found the fittest on earth, that's fine. But if we want to have an entire industry surrounding coaching athletes of people who are able to make their living training, just all that kind of stuff, if you treat everyone other than the winners badly and just kind of like are repeatedly sticking your middle finger up at people and are like, haha, figure it out. Like, oh, you said this bad thing about me. Well, guess what? I'm going to try to like program something to screw you over or whatever. Like it's just not a good system for like building up the entire community. And I think that some of that was, a purposeful like dramatization just to kind of like create controversy and draw eyeballs. Like, sure, fine, whatever. But I do think other parts of it were just like, hey, this is how the organization was historically run with Greg at the helm, right? Sevon on his podcast was like, CrossFit was run like a motorcycle gang. And it's like, yeah, that's actually bad. Like you shouldn't run like a multi-million-dollar international organization, like attempting to, change the world in terms of how health and fitness is viewed and to build a new sport. Like that should not be run like a motorcycle gang. Motorcycle gangs are sort of like petty, nepotistic, like don't follow principles other than like be loyal to your friends and like attack your enemies. Like that's not good. You don't want to do that. So I think that the overall ecosystem surrounding the sport, other than just like the very fittest people, is going to benefit a lot from just having more structure, a more open back and forth dialogue, like an organization willing to actually take feedback and listen rather than just being like, oh, well, you're the fittest on earth, you need to figure it out. Like, it's just stupid. That stuff always really rubbed me the wrong way.
The one thing that really I saw in this last year's games, there was one event, the run clean one, where it was like progressively heavier clean barbells and they had like a 200-meter run in between. I think that was the first time I've seen Dave change a workout partway through. So they ran there was like 2 waves of it. They did lighter weights and then the second time was a shorter run with heavier weights. And between the men and the women going, they changed the time cap because people weren't finishing. And then it was supposed to be the same run distance, but they shortened the run distance for the second one to try and get people in earlier. And he changed the workout as it was going on because either it wasn't tested properly or so. I don't know what happened, but that was the first time I've really seen Dave kind of falter with a workout.
I mean, if you read his book, though, stuff like that actually happened all the time, right? He would change the workout leading into it frequently. At the CrossFit Games, which is stressful. I mean, I will say,
but not partway through.
Yeah, partway through is kind of a different story altogether. But yeah, I mean, I program multiple competitions, and you do test stuff, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is basically going to work. And then sometimes when it actually is playing out, you're like, oh shit, right? Like people are doing this crazy thing that I didn't think of. The time cap is wrong. The weight is too heavy. Didn't consider that they did this event before. Like, there's always going to be something that comes up where you're like, whoops.
Yeah, you and I have like done stuff like that, and testing for South Loop Games, when you have like 1 or 2 people testing a workout once, there's only so much information you can get. Dave plans this all year. Like he's been testing open workouts for the last 2 months with different athletes in different settings, and he's drilled it so many times that he has that data. If let's say South Loop Games was a bigger event and you spent a longer lead up time, you could have different people testing different scenarios and you'd be able to have everything dialed in a lot better.
I don't fully agree with that though. I think that you just don't know what's going to happen until it actually happens. And like, yeah, the expectation for the CrossFit Games and it being like an entire department's full-time job should be higher in terms of the ability to test and figure things out. But still, when it's an actual real life competition, people are going to surprise you in both directions, no matter what, right? They're going to be able to do something that you didn't think they could do, or something is going to go completely wrong where you're like, it's like 120 degrees out and we're doing Murph. Like,
Right.
Dang.
I mean,
think of
like
that.
you take like Danielle Brandon at the games this year on the handstand walk event, which she just like came out and crushed. And it's like, okay, they may not have foreseen someone doing as well as she did on that event and running away with it like that. But I think there's a difference between that and having a workout that's just wrong, like that needs correcting straight away.
Yeah, because you're always going to have those just like freaks who are just very, very good at like a certain thing, and they just surpass all expectations and they do super well. But if it's consistent across the board and you're just finding that, yeah, there's no room for that, and for something, I mean, I'm not too sure of like how well they're staffed compared to previous years and how much money is going into the games compared to previous years, but they should be able to create something which is a little bit more robust and just a little bit better planned. I mean, because the thing is as well is like the weather has always been something that's cropped up as well. Like I think it was like the sled push in the 2019 games. I forget what it was, but people were like, yeah, on one side of the field it was like pushing a sled in mud, and on the other side of the field it was like pushing it on ice or something along those lines because of the heat and the shade or whatever and the moisture on the turf.
Yeah, it was like half the field was shaded so that it hadn't dried out. Yeah.
Like that type of stuff, it doesn't, like, I understand, maybe he's like in a secret location testing all this stuff out. No, you need to be in Madison like the days in the run up to it, and you need to be testing it exact time that you're going to be doing it, and just running through all of those things like that. It needs to be sort of organized on that level. Because just imagine if you are one of those people who just trains their ass off all year, and I mean, you're always going to get some athletes not having a good time, whether it's putting their foot on the line and getting DQ'd, but those types of things where it sort of just it can be managed. It needs to be managed. No ifs or no buts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for the folks who are really upset about it, I think it's sort of like whatever the lead singer and songwriter being kicked out of your favorite band, right? And then it's like, oh, this isn't the same thing at all. And so I get that, and I do appreciate a lot of the creativity that Dave has put into the sport and has like defined what it is. But to John's earlier point, right? I mean, it's sort of like it's not the same thing as a band where there's like one dominant creative vision that can really push the whole thing forward. It's a sport with an infrastructure that has been built. And I think that plenty of people are capable of writing creative workouts and making stuff work. And hopefully they can set it up in a way where the sport becomes more professionalized as a whole, rather than just this sort of like weird fitness freak thing with some like guy with cornrows, like, what's he doing?
Yeah.
What's he up to?